Welcome, everybody, to Introduction to U.S. Politics. I'll be your professor, Dr. Zach Sullivan. This first week, it's really important to look around the site. Make sure to take a look at my first news post on D2L. Each week, there'll be a checklist to make sure that you accomplish everything you need to do on a weekly basis. That's under Materials and Checklist. Check out my welcome message. Obviously, take a look at this first mini lecture. These lectures are going to be around 20 to 30 minutes each per week, and they're going to go over the weekly reading. This week's might be just a little bit longer because we're also going to be talking about course expectations and assignments and that kind of fun stuff. Again, it's important to look around the D2L site to see how the class is structured. Carefully review the syllabus. Read that first chapter as assigned. Take the extra credit Getting to Know You quiz. This is only going to cover what's in the syllabus. It's entirely extra credit, so you're not going to be marked down for anything. And introduce yourself in the rumpus room. If you do those two things, you're going to start out with 10 extra credit bonus points, which is always a good thing. The first week's mini lecture, which you're currently listening to right this very second, is going to go over course requirements, reflect on Chapter 1, and introduce discussion questions. These discussion questions are also going to be posted in the weekly discussion area under Communication and Discussions. Make sure that you've read the syllabus. Make sure that you've read as assigned before participating in the mini lecture and participating in discussions. So both of these things are going to require that you're reflecting on assigned reading for the week. All right, let's get started. Here's the assigned text for the class, American Government and Politics Today, brief edition. The most recent version is 2018-2019, but you can use either of the last 3 editions. They cover the same concepts. They might use some different examples, but if you can save a little bit of money, get a previous edition, that's totally fine by me. Alrighty, well, the class is going to be structured on a weekly basis. So at the beginning of each week, make sure that you first read as assigned, and the schedule is in the syllabus. Also, make sure that you view any online films or assigned clips for that week, also indicated in the schedule in the syllabus. Step 2 is going to be to view the weekly PowerPoint presentation / mini lecture that you are enjoying right this very second. This will be available Monday of each week. I will also post PDFs of the lecture outlines, so that may be helpful in terms of following the mini lecture and also in taking notes. Step 3, make sure that you review the class participation rubric. This is under Materials and Content, and jump right into weekly discussions. You can access the week's discussion by clicking on Communication and Discussion. Each week, you will need to do 1 substantive original post and at least 2 posts on the original post of your classmates. So you're going to have your larger post, and then you're going to have at least 2 comments on the original posts of your classmates. Make sure also each week that you take a look at the weekly checklist. This is under Materials and Checklist, to make sure that you've completed all the week's tasks. Okay, so how's grading going to work? Well, first of all, 20% of the grade, 200 points, is participating in weekly class discussion. This is determined by analyzing student involvement in the weekly discussion area and students' responses to the weekly guiding questions. And those will be included in the weekly presentation, but also be posted under the week's discussion area. The expectation is that you'll have 1 original post to a guiding question and at least 2 responses to your classmates' on-topic posts. Make sure to read the post of your classmates as well. I'll also be assessing this. Again, we have a grading rubric, a detailed grading rubric that's posted under Materials and Content. Read that carefully before jumping in so that you understand what the expectations are. We'll have 3 analysis papers for the class. These are worth 100 points each, a total of 300 points possible. Each of these papers will be 2 to 3 pages, 500 to 750 words, and you will analyze either an assigned film for the class or a news item of your choice that closely relates to assigned reading. A detailed grading rubric for this is also posted under Materials and Content. The deadlines are indicated in the course schedule. They're also indicated in the Dropbox area. and they'll also be indicated in the class calendar. Late papers will be accepted, but they will be deducted a full letter grade. The last possible date to submit a late paper is posted in the syllabus. Submit all papers using D2L. Don't email them to me. Go under assessment and the assignments Dropbox area to submit your work. Quizzes. Yes, there will be quizzes. We will have weekly quizzes over the course of the term. Each one of these we'll have 14 of them. So any one of them should not be considered make or break. It's just a way to make sure that you are following along in the reading and that you are building an understanding of concepts related to the weekly learning outcomes. To prepare for these, carefully consider the weekly learning outcomes and the key concepts that are identified in the text. Of course, read each week's materials carefully, then review the mini lecture like the one you're listening to right this very second. I will also post PowerPoint lecture outlines for you to take notes with. These quizzes are going to be available Friday through Sunday each week. Again, around 10 questions. It will not be possible to take missed quizzes. So if you miss a quiz, that's it. However, I will be dropping the 2 lowest scores over the term. So if you miss one, that obviously would be the one that gets dropped. To get familiar with the quiz function, after you've read the syllabus, jump in, take the Getting Started quiz. It requires no poli-sci background, just that you've read the quiz. Helps me to get to know you just a little bit better. And it helps you to get to know the quiz function in D2L. Again, we will have weekly quizzes. Please let me know if you have any questions or concerns. And as we go, I will do my best to help you and help provide materials so that you're prepared for these quizzes. And there will be a final exam. The final exam is going to be worth 20% of the overall grade. It will cover many of the questions and concepts from your weekly quizzes. Those weekly quizzes, as you know, deal directly with weekly learning outcomes. So there'll be more preparation for this as we get closer. There'll be roughly 70 questions. You'll have 70 minutes to complete the exam. And as we get closer, I'll provide tips on how you can best prepare to take the final exam. You may also complete, if you wish, an optional extra credit civic engagement project that's worth up to 100 additional points. To do so, you would need to attend a pre-approved interactive political activity or training. So that's something that would need to be pre-approved by me before you actually do it, or participate in a campus club that's closely related to politics. For example, you could get training and serve as a Minnesota election judge, or you could become an Inver Hills student senator and get involved with student government here on campus. So those would be 2 examples. Again, make sure to reach out to me ahead of time so I can pre-approve whatever it is that you're looking at. Simply attending a meeting or going to a political event, that's not enough to satisfy this extra credit project. You could also get involved with an off-campus political organization. That could be a political party or a specific political campaign or an interest group that you care about. Those are all things that you can do as long as they involve some training and an opportunity to carry out the training that you're getting. Again, any project needs to be pre-approved, needs to be approved by me in advance. Once you've completed this extra credit project, you will also write a 2 to 3 page paper detailing your experience and relating it to concepts considered in the course. The deadlines for this are in the syllabus course schedule. So if you're interested in this, start thinking about it right now. Reach out to me. I'm happy to brainstorm and discuss some possible options for you. Okay, here are the overall course outcomes for Introduction to U.S. Politics. We'll assess U.S. government institutions employing a variety of political science perspectives. We'll assess U.S. government processes employing a variety of political science perspectives. We'll assess U.S. political culture employing a variety of political science perspectives. We'll reflect critically on our own values as a citizen, and we'll develop skills that enable participation in public life. Okay, I know I sound like a broken record, but please carefully review the syllabus for the class. It includes the course schedule, class policies, institutional policies. This is available on the main D2L page, but also under materials and content. Also under materials and content is the student resource guide, which is an overview of all the support services that are here at Inver Hills for our students to help you succeed.
And here are our learning outcomes for the week. We'll define the following concepts: politics, government, representative democracy, political culture, pluralism, conservatism, and liberalism. We'll compare majoritarianism, elite theory, and pluralism as theories of how democratic systems operate. And we'll recognize fundamental conflicts that occur between the values of liberty and order and between those of liberty and equality.
All right, let's start with the basics here. What is politics? I mean, the term politics gets thrown around pretty loosely. And so we need to drill down what we're really talking about here for the term to have any meaning. For the sake of the rigorous study of political science and the study of politics as a science, we're referring to the process, sometimes struggle, that people engage in to decide which members of society get certain benefits and privileges and which members of society are excluded from them. Put quite simply by a founding father of political science, politics determines who gets what, when, and how. We also kind of need to drill down this term government. What is a government? Well, societies develop certain institutions to handle public issues. And these are what we refer to as the government. They're responsible for making decisions for a community. Government is also the ultimate authority in a society. Governments could be elected, but throughout much of human history, they were imposed by force or they were inherited, like you would see with monarchy. Some key concepts from this first week of reading: order, liberty, authority, legitimacy. Really spend some time drilling down these meanings and making sure that you understand them. Right, types of government around the world. One way that we can learn a lot more about American government is through comparison and other governmental systems that we see elsewhere and throughout history. The first term we need to look at is authoritarianism. There's a very easy way to remember this. It just means not democratic or non-democratic. There's a lot of authoritarian systems out there, and they vary. They could be military dictatorships. They could be a traditional monarchy. They could be a communist system. These are all forms of authoritarianism. The most severe form of authoritarianism is totalitarianism. You look at the root word there, total control of a society. So the ruler or small group of rulers in a totalitarian state seek total control of a society. North Korea would be a modern example. Germany under Hitler, the Soviet Union under Stalin, those would be historic examples. Democracy, I think many of us are familiar with this term, but power is vested in the people and majority rules. More than half the world's population lives in some form of democracy. If you would have taken this class from me 5 years ago, I would tell you that since the collapse of the Soviet Union, we have been on sort of a steady trajectory of more democracy in the world. But over the last 5 years, globally, we've seen sort of a retreat of democratic values around the world. It doesn't mean that democracy is over, but we've seen a global trend away from democracy. We'll talk about that more as we go through the class. So some concepts that are related to democracy. Well, first of all, pure democracy is direct democracy, when citizens propose and vote on laws. And also pure democracy is majority rules. That is to say, there's not protection for who's ever not in the majority, whatever minority that is. So the founding generation of this country was very skeptical about too much democracy. I mean, essentially too much democracy could be mob rule. That's obviously problematic. So there are some ways to put checks on democracy. First of all, do you have a liberal or constitutional democracy? And that means that the majority is checked by laws. That even if a majority wants to do something, they can't do it if it's in violation of the Constitution. So if a majority of people in the United States want to deprive a minority of, say, their religious freedom, the Constitution is there to protect those freedoms. The United States is also a representative democracy. That is, in most cases, we're not making direct decisions. We vote on, we hire people to make our public decisions for us. And that's why we have elections for the city council. And that's why we have elections for the state legislature and governor and Congress and the presidency. We're essentially choosing people. We're hiring people to make our decisions rather than make those ourselves. Now, there are some exceptions to that. At the state level, we have referenda, we have initiatives. These are ways that citizens, in some cases, can directly put things on the ballot, can directly make decisions um, of matters of public policy. We do see that at the state level. To change the Minnesota Constitution, for example, that has to go to voters to decide if we want to change the Minnesota Constitution. But we don't see a lot of direct democracy at the federal level in the United States. It is representative. We are selecting people to make decisions for us. So, in case anybody ever asks you this on a quiz or an exam, the United States is both a liberal and representative democracy. That is, we have a constitution, we have certain laws that the will of majority that are supposed to protect individuals from the will of majority, and we're also representative. That is, that we select people to make political decisions, to make policy decisions, rather than make those ourselves. As we wade into the study of American politics and political science in general, we're going to find that there are a lot of competing concepts, competing theories that we need to deal with. Some competing concepts that we really see in American democracy are majoritarianism, that in a democracy, the government should do what the majority of people want. A lot of people feel that way, that they should do that. Yet this is in tension with constitutional and liberal democracies, right? That the will of the majority and government be limited to protect minority rights and protect individual rights. So there's tension there. Another concept at work is elite theory, that society is ruled by a small group who exercise power in their self-interest. These could be economic elites, they could be political elites, they could be intellectual elites. And a number of members of the founding generation in the United States, people like Hamilton and others, really believed that elites should be running the show, that the average citizen was just simply not up for participation in a democracy. The other concept that we see at work in the United States is pluralism, that political decisions are ultimately the result of conflict among powerful groups. That could be economic interests, that could be interest groups that represent labor and workers like unions, and that ultimately public policy is a result of this conflict that occurs between lots of different interest groups. The most fundamental reason why we need government is to provide basic security and order. So think about this, like how does the American government provide security and order? A lot of people might immediately think of police officers or the United States military protecting our borders and so forth. But of course, government does a lot more than just provide policing, doesn't it? Or provide national defense. The government has a role in healthcare. Government has a role in education. Right now, as you listen to this, you are taking part in a state of Minnesota public college. So we must ask this broader question that how do these services provide security and order, or do they? Are they things that government should be involved with? So I want you to think a little bit about that. And that might come up in the online discussion this week. Also consider what happens when there is no acting government, and what have been some examples of that when there is a territory, when there is an area that does not have a functioning government. What's the outcome of that? So there's a problem obviously with too much government. We certainly saw that in the Soviet Union under communist rule. And then there are also issues with not enough government when the authorities and when these institutions cannot provide for basic security and order. All right, yet another area of tension that we tend to see in the study of American policy is in American political values themselves. For example, the fundamental role of government in providing security and order is in direct tension with individual liberty. For example, you enjoy the freedom of speech, but you cannot use that freedom of speech to plot a crime. You cannot use that freedom of speech to threaten somebody. So all individual liberty is limited to some degree. And I just hope that you are able to reflect on that when you're engaging in the online discussion boards or when you're writing your analysis paper. You should demonstrate that you understand that there's a tension between these things. And you should have an argument. Your argument could be more in the direction of liberty. It could be more in the direction of overall societal order and safety. An example that we've seen recently, right, is how much does somebody's individual rights with regard to a virus epidemic, COVID-19, how much of their individual rights should be put aside for collective safety and and public health? How much should we be able to tell people to stay at home, to wear a mask, and to do certain things? This is a classic tension between liberty and order. We also have the American value of equality before the law, equal opportunities, and yet we also have property rights. And this is another tension that we see in our system. How much of the tax burden should be supported by wealthy Americans, for example? How much of an individual's wealth should they be able to leave to their children without taxation? These are all those kind of things. How much of a public responsibility is it to help people access health care? Or is that something that should be left to the individual? These are all issues that relate to equality versus individual wealth and property, and liberty versus order. Where we stand on these tensions, right? These tensions between order and liberty, these tensions between equality and individual property rights or wealth, this all forms our political ideology, or it influences our political ideology. So what is that? It's a set of beliefs about the goals of politics, what's the most desirable political outcome. Most of American politics happen between liberalism and conservatism, but in a minute here, we'll go over sort of a broader political ideological spectrum. Modern liberalism advocates action to improve the lives of individuals, or at least more so relative to conservatism, greater support for civil rights, more tolerance for social change, things like same-sex marriage and other areas of social change. Social conservatism advocates much more limited role for government in helping individual, particularly at the national or federal level, supports traditional values and lifestyles, and generally has less tolerance for social change. Okay, let's take a look at the traditional ideological spectrum that we've seen in the United States. I've already kind of taken a look at the center here, liberalism, conservatism, and the spectrum there. But more broadly, on the far left, socialism would have much more active government control of major economic sectors. That would be the government's responsible for providing health care and managing the transportation system and so forth. On the other end of the spectrum, you see libertarianism with almost no regulation of the economy, really just leave it to the marketplace. Like I said, most of our actual political debates in the United States are between liberalism and conservatism. Sometimes politicians will call themselves libertarians or socialists, or call somebody else a libertarian or a socialist as a way to insult them. But most of our debate is between liberalism and conservatism. So the traditional spectrum falls a little bit short, and so this four-square grid might provide a little bit more nuance when it comes to ideology. For example, modern conservatives in many cases will be culturally conservative, but seek economic liberty. So they'd be in that bottom right quadrant. Whereas modern liberalism seeks cultural liberty, but perhaps more economic equality, more social programs and stuff like that. So this might provide a little bit more nuance when it comes to assessing your own ideology, but also taking a look at American ideology more broadly. All this relates to the concept of political socialization. This is how we learn about politics. This is how we get our political values. Where did those things come from? We weren't born little Democrats. We weren't born little Republicans. If we have no interest in politics, we weren't born that way either. Our political values are socialized through different processes. And once our political beliefs and habits harden, they become part of us. They're not easily changed. So where do these attitudes come from? Well, this gets into the concept of primacy, early political experiences and information, and recency, more recent experiences in with politics. And as you might imagine, the most important factors in political socialization tend to be those things that are your earliest experiences, primacy. Um, your parents' political attitudes. If your parents were both Republicans, you're much more likely to be a Republican. If your parents were both Democrats, you're much more likely to be a Democrat. If your parents were uninterested in politics, you're probably not that interested in politics. So it's highly predictive, and a number of studies have indicated this. Now, if one of your parents was a Democrat, one parent was a Republican, you're much more likely to be an independent. So we do see a fair amount of that as well. Early educational opportunities. That's one of the reasons why we pledge allegiance to the flag. There's a clear attempt to socialize young people as they go through the public school system to have positive views of their country and to be patriotic. Um, Early religious experiences or a lack of religious experiences. These are all things that form our political socialization. But more recent events can also impact our views of politics. For example, the Great Depression had a substantial impact on so many people. Maybe a lot of them were, your great grandparents, but people who went through the depths of the Great Depression and saw a lot of these programs like Social Security, they ended up being supportive of Roosevelt, supportive of things like Social Security. And if they hadn't faced that crisis, they might not have changed those attitudes. It's going to be interesting to see if the pandemic that we're facing has a long-term impact on political socialization. Are we going to look at the role of government or how politics ought to be practiced differently after this crisis? So sometimes major events can change things, but for the most part, it's early experiences that influence our political socialization. Also, too, the longer you spend in college, the longer you spend in educational settings, you're much more likely to explore different political ideas and maybe change your mind. So to summarize, politics is the process by which people decide which members of society get certain benefits or privileges and which members don't. Government is an institution uh, which makes decisions to resolve conflicts and allocate benefits and privileges. Some key theories of American democracy include majoritarianism, elite theory, and pluralism. There are fundamental American values that are in tension with each other: liberty and order, equality and property rights and wealth. And these are things that I want you to explore in your analysis paper. And don't take the easy way out. Don't say, hey, I've got freedom of speech, and therefore, freedom of speech is always in tension with broader societal order. So where should the line be drawn? That's where your argument ought to be.
Okay, here's your week one discussion questions. Don't worry, I'm not going to go through these one by one. They will also be posted under the week one discussion area, which is under communication and discussion. Each week, you will need to have one substantive response to one of these guiding questions, 100 to 150 words Do draw on key concepts and examples from assigned reading in making your point. Also, you should have at least 2 comments on your classmates' on-topic posts. If you do all that, you'll get a perfect grade for participation for the week. And if you do that throughout the course of the semester, then ultimately a perfect grade for the entire semester. Please let me know if you have any questions or concerns, but your first step is going to be taking a look at that grading rubric that's under materials and content. Okay, that's it for this week. This really should be a fascinating semester to study American politics. It's such a pivotal time in American history. Please call, email, post with any questions or concerns. I do have weekly Zoom office hours. To access those, go under Meet Your Professor right on the main D2L page, and we'll offer those twice a week. Don't forget to complete the week 1 checklist to make sure that you've accomplished all the tasks that you need to do for week 1 so that you're off to a good start. I'm really looking forward to working with you.